powerful new movement is rising across America. From the Mississippi Delta to the Apache stronghold, from the homeless encampments of Washington to the coal fields of West Virginia, we are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, and we are building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, between the primaries and the general election, we will rise together for the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
Our nation is at a historic crossroads. There are those who say big change isn't necessary or possible, that we are powerless to make our lives better.
But history teaches us that it is exactly in times like these that people from all walks of life must build a broad and deep movement from the bottom up.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic for a massive, historic online gathering that will embolden us, strengthen us, and prepare us to fight for the kind of society we know we so badly need and deserve.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org.
The poverty in the midst of pandemic, we must do more toward mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating people for the movement who vote. We would be in the cities, but we are doing this by live stream. We plan to be in Dayton, Ohio, but because of COVID and because of the need to stay in place, stay alive, and organize, we are doing this via video live stream on many platforms. We are so glad that we can be together, even in the midst of the struggles, the midst of the pain, and even in the midst of the deaths. It is important that we do not die, that our commitment to justice lives and continues to fight for what is right. And so at this time, we want to remind the nation, because this is a national, nationwide live stream, we want to remind the nation of the pain and the action even before COVID, what we were fighting for and against, and why it's even more important that we do it now. Would you all in the audience be reminded with this video?
Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
I'm here today to share my daughter Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast, and she wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
Now, I'm also a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide at a far greater rate than the national average. Why? Because they're stressed out. They're stressed out. They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs because they can't pay for all the equipment that it takes to run a farm. And they're in the most dangerous line of work there is, yet many can't afford to buy health insurance. We have no hospital. We are in a food desert. We have one grocery store for the whole county. Our neighbor, my husband's uncle, still drinks pond water self-treated with chlorine. He had to have a kidney removed at age 64. And the year before that, his wife died of some unknown cancer.
Our democracy is in trouble.
Our democracy is in trouble.
And we come to demand.
Second warning.
Because it's crucial that we make ourselves heard.
We are the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are here. We are poor. We are clergy. And we're here to say to our nation's capital and to the highest court in this land, that everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to learn. Everybody has a right to love. Everybody has a right to living wages. Everybody has a right to vote. Everybody has a right to thrive in this society.
Everybody say, oh!
I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. Freedom fighter, and he taught us how to fight.
The poor and the clergy. We read Article 6 of the Kentucky State Constitution that says we have a right to free assembly.
We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
There are 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, almost half of this nation. And any nation that ignores half of its people is in a moral and economic crisis.
So we will do more. There will be a movement that will break through the con and bring people together to save the heart and the soul of this democracy and this world.
We cannot forget the pain and the hurt that existed prior to COVID. That's why the Poor People's Campaign can never utter these words. We must simply go back to normal. Normal was 140 million people living in poverty and low wealth. And our next guest is our special friend, the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights, Philip Alston. He's been working with Reverend Dr. Liz, myself, and others. Has been on this from before COVID. He was laying it out. He was talking about how we needed to address poverty in the United States and in the world, but certainly in the United States, and that we could not any longer afford to for it to just be a marginal and not even mentioned issue. So from the UN tonight, as he's actually preparing to step away from that post, and we're going to recruit him to go around the country with us. That's what we're going to do, and continue to stand with us. But he's been a powerful friend in the United Nations. We thank him for it. Philip, come on and talk to us about why in this moment you are still saying we have to deal with this issue of poverty as a matter of human rights in this nation.
Thanks, Reverend Barber. I hope you can hear me. I'm really thrilled and honored to be part of this. I am stepping down from my role as UN Special Rapporteur. One of the first things I will do will be to join the Poor People's Campaign as a member and start contributing, which I was not supposed to do when I was needing to be independent. I want to just make the point that you have, which is that, in fact, COVID-19 has not changed anything fundamentally. It's just lifted the lid on the obscene reality behind the problems that the Poor People's Campaign has long been talking about. The deep unaddressed poverty in the United States, the rapidly growing insecurity, not just for the poor, but for the low wealth people, as you call them, the frightening disparities between the rich and the rest, which are being exposed more extraordinarily than before. And of course, above all, the deep racial differences because of the entrenched discrimination. So some people are saying, my God, this is so surprising. The African Americans and the Hispanics and others are dying at a higher rate. They have always been set up perfectly so that they would be dying at a higher rate because they don't have access to all of the basic essentials that they need. The distressing thing, I think, particularly as someone who looks at things globally, is that in the United States, the response has been really short-term, largely catering for the wealthy. It's been almost entirely political. The science has played a very minor role. The idea of reaching across the the other side and trying to do something in a bipartisan way is a joke. It's not happening. The worst problems are being papered over, so all of the solutions are really short term. How do we get through the next week or the next month? But no effort to look at what are going to be immense problems in 6 months from now and probably in a year and much longer. And of course, a total neglect of climate change. Many of the solutions are propping up all of the fossil fuel industries and are just saving up, just shoring up the next crisis, which will be with us as soon as COVID-19 is basically under control. My final word is that the Poor People's Campaign knows all about this. There's only one solution. It's political. And there's only one way forward, and it's mobilization. The Poor People's Campaign is really playing a central role, and I wish you great strength in really being able to lead the American people in the aftermath of this current pandemic. Thank you.
I know, Philip, on behalf of Liz and myself and the entire campaign, first of all, we are so thankful for your objective position that you've taken. Now we are certainly glad to know that you will be right here on the front lines. We need your wisdom, and we have to mobilize. Did you all hear him say that all over the nation? There's only one way forward. That's the special rapporteur for extreme poverty and human. Only one way. That is why June 20th, 2020 is so important. We couldn't cancel. We just had to reframe it. And that's why we have to have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people to tune in to our mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington, a digital gathering. And that's why June 20th will not be an end, but a continuation. And that's why we must build political power. We must do more mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating people for the movement who vote. And that's why we must shift the narrative. And that's why we must change the narrators. Thank you so much, Philip. And now we come to our tri-chair remarks tonight, who will be introducing testifiers. Why do we do testifiers? We do testifiers because from the very beginning, we said this movement would put the face and the voice on poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. We said America had to see the voices and the faces so that those stories could break the consciousness and the heart of this nation. We do not invite our testifiers to tell how strong they have been to make it through, because some of the stuff shouldn't have to make it through. That's one of the, they want people, sometimes poor people to impacted, to get up and say, oh, we did this and we pulled ourselves up. Well, the reality is that shouldn't be the reality. It should be a level playing field for everyone. So we now are going to have these three tri-chairs, and I want you to introduce yourselves. First, Pennsylvania, and then the Pennsylvania tri-chair will then introduce the testifier. And then we'll have Ohio, and then the Ohio one of the tri-chairs will introduce the Ohio testifier, and then Michigan will introduce the Michigan testifier, and then Wisconsin. Is that right? Said Liz? Wisconsin, and then that person will introduce the testifier. And to the testifiers, though you've been working and practicing on these speeches, I want you to speak from your heart, from your belly, from your gut tonight. I want you to let the nation hear your passion tonight. I want you to say why it is before COVID and now during COVID, and why it is you are more committed than ever to mobilize for June 20th, 2020, mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital gathering. And so, Pennsylvania.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Reverend Barber. And good evening, everyone. My name is Nijmi Zakia Zarinko, one of the chairs of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, calling in tonight from Philadelphia. And I want to ask us, when we think about Pennsylvania before this pandemic, what happens when a pandemic hits on top of a catastrophe? In Pennsylvania, even before the pandemic, we experienced the closure of 8 hospitals since the beginning of 2019. Before the coronavirus, 40% of children were poor or near poor. Before this crisis, there were over 11,000 cases pending in PA immigration courts. Well before the beginning of March, the minimum wage was and still is $7.25 an hour. Before COVID-19, up to 60,000 people were evicted in PA every year. And studies have shown that we have higher levels of lead exposure in many counties than our siblings on this call tonight from Flint, Michigan. We had $1 billion of our money given to fossil fuel, fracking, and chemical companies in the form of tax subsidies. This is why the PA Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has been able to build with organizations present in more than 50 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. Now I'd like to introduce Chandra Delaney, a 15-year advocate for the human and civil rights of prisoners from Pittsburgh, PA.
Okay, I apologize. I thought they were.
No, you're fine. We got you now. All right.
I am the director of the Human Rights Coalition Fed Up, an organization of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, family members, and activists. When my son was incarcerated at 18, I was forced to become a warrior for the incarcerated. Because he was a jailhouse lawyer, whistleblower, and activist behind the walls, he was in solitary for 11 years and held in prison for 15 years beyond his minimum.
My God.
I began sharing his story and the stories of others to change the narrative and bring the humanity of prisoners to the world. I wrote about the medical crisis in our prisons, not knowing a global pandemic was coming. Long before coronavirus hit, medical care in prisons was substandard. Conditions inside and the land many prisons are on is toxic. Many facilities are old, dilapidated, and unsanitary. In Pennsylvania, where I'm from, I hear about the black mold, brown water, and food unfit for consumption. This combination of conditions and prisoners' increased susceptibility to chronic illnesses brings us beyond crisis to extreme emergency. There is no social distancing in prisons, especially when you are double-celled or dormitory style. I now receive frantic calls and messages from people deeply concerned for the lives of their family members. People with underlying conditions are being forced to cell with others who are sick. I've seen cell phone videos of the conditions and the sick people. One prisoner should have had his day in court with the Innocence Project after being unjustly incarcerated for 30 years, but instead, he became one of the first to die in Pennsylvania. Our commutation has been put on hold instead of fast-tracked. Release processes are being dragged out instead of treated with urgency. We are demanding governors all around the country use their reprieve powers to release vulnerable people and people who meet certain criteria. This is a matter of life and death. Prisoners are
Thank you. Sandra, I want to ask you a quick question as you were saying that prisoners are. Did you say the land was toxic? I know that, but I want you to say that.
Yes, okay. Some of the prisons are actually built on toxic land, and they've kind of made it a habit of building these prisons on land that there's no other use for, and most of the time is because it's toxic. We have a prison right here in Pennsylvania that's toxic.
One other question, because there are media that's on and others. Did you also hear you say that the food is beyond edible? That many times the food?
Yes. Even a prisoner leaked out something where the container said not fit for human consumption.
And they're feeding this to people. And the last thing, because I want to make sure people around the nation are hearing what we're saying. Did you also say that there was somebody that had been found innocent and was in the Innocence Project and died since then from COVID?
Yes, he was our first prisoner in Pennsylvania to die.
And he was on his way out having been wrongfully incarcerated?
Yes.
What is it? Can you say his name?
I'm so sorry. I don't remember.
Okay. But I guess that you're fully committed then to June 2020, and you know that we have to mass mobilize in this nation around these issues. Am I right? Did she go? All right. All right. Now don't mute me while I'm interviewing. All right. Thank you so much, Sandra. But audience, you need to hear what we're saying. This is not play stuff. This is serious, serious stuff that's happening. And why it's so wrong for us to hear the answer to COVID-19 being talked about really from a perspective of wealth rather than from the perspective of the pain that already existed even prior to. Ohio, our tri-chair.
Hello, Mary Aguilera from Cincinnati, Ohio. Honored to be here with all of you this evening. I'm here to introduce Linda Nicholson and tell you about what's going on in Ohio. Long before COVID-19, Ohio was in crisis. Ohio leads the nation with Kentucky in the addiction epidemic. Since 2007, drug overdose has been the leading cause of accidental death. There is a shortage of 256,875 affordable rental homes for extremely low-income households. 30% of renters are extremely low income. 14 hospitals have closed in some of the communities that are the most impoverished and susceptible to the COVID-19. This includes one in West Dayton that was recently torn down. Ohio spends less per capita on public health than nearly every other state. Recently, Jobs Ohio committed $30 million to build an ethane cracker plant to make single-use plastics on the dirtiest river in the nation and from which 5 million people get their drinking water. Ohio taxpayers just contributed $21.2 billion to the Pentagon and military in 2019, which is almost a third of its budget. Of the 11.69 million people living in Ohio, 34% of them are poor or low income, a total of 3.8 million residents. This includes 48% of children, 40% of women. There are 860,000 Black, 256,000 Latinx, and 2.9 million white people who are poor. Linda Nicholson is a resident of Dayton, Ohio. She has lived a real story of what almost half the children in Ohio face, and now as an adult, what 40% of women face. Without a living wage and other basic human rights, such as health care, and a large percent of Ohioans will continue to struggle and be highly susceptible to the next virus that comes our way. I give you Linda Nicholson.
Hello, Reverend Barber. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Linda Lou Nicholson. Much has changed in all of our lives since COVID-19 began its rampage through our country. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is the disrespect that I face as a poor person. I'm 64 years old, and for the first time in my life, I earn more than $15 an hour. And that's only because of the additional $2 an hour I earn now as hero pay in my essential job as the pharmacy technician. Since I declared bankruptcy in 2019 in order to save my house from foreclosure, I've had to make monthly payments of $1,440 a month. That's $1,440 a month for my combined mortgage and bankruptcy payments. After paying that bill, I barely make ends meet. My utilities are as low as I can get them, and I have no health insurance. I didn't sign up for Medicare Part B because of the cost. You've looked at a certain way when you're poor. I've seen this since I was a child, raised in Dayton's premier public housing, DeSoto Bath. All my life, I've been told that people like me do not deserve basic dignity and rights. Even other African Americans look down on poor Black people. There's a stigma that comes with being poor, a disrespect that spills into your family life. My only child, a son who's 35 years old now, doesn't speak to me. I think it's because he wants to be part of the American culture that likes to own things, be rich, have the best car. I don't fit in with that life. I can be exposed to the virus when I ride the bus to work and when I'm on the job. I do all I can to protect myself, but I don't know what I would do if I get sick with the coronavirus because I don't have health care. I really love my job, and I'm glad to have it. But this country needs to treat its workers better, especially its older workers. This is why I'm part of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. I want to be part of a movement that's fighting to create a just society for all, and that the mission of the poor people, and that is the mission of the poor people. And that is why I'm testifying tonight at this digital mass meeting. This, along with other impact people from 3 other states. Reverend Barber, co-chairman of the national campaign, said it's fuses and wounds of inequality in America that were open and given entry to this pandemic. We need a real rescue package that helps everyone, especially the 140 million poor and low wealth. Congress passed bills that totaling $3 trillion, much of it going to big corporations, but workers barely get a crumb. As Reverend Barber says, we need health insurance for the uninsured and paid sick leave for all. Those are some of the reasons why Congress must pass a bill that helps people such as myself. All my life I've been told that people like me do not deserve basic dignity and rights. But in Ohio, 34% of us are poor or low income. That's a total of 3.8 million residents, including 33% of white people, 29 million, and 61% of Black people. Even though I feel depressed at times, I'm going to keep pushing and keep fighting with the Poor People's Campaign until minimum wage reaches $15 an hour. We can't survive on low-paying jobs. Workers in this country should earn a living wage. Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that name, co-chair of the National Poor People's Campaign, it's becoming clear in this pandemic that most essential workers in this country are done by those of us who earn the least. The number of poor people is increasing in an economy that relies on non-unionized, low-wage work and part-time work, she says. We are truly are relying on each other now, and we all deserve a living wage.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. I was trying to talk to you, couldn't have it on mute, and there was a little something going on with the live show. I guess they didn't sneak and put me on mute on purpose. But Linda, I want you to say something again that the world needs to hear, because I don't want folk to miss it. You said that this is your first time making over $15 an hour.
That's true.
Now, you mentioned your age. I didn't mention it, so I don't get it, but you don't mind. I want you to say that again. Would you say it?
I'm 64. I'll be 65 May the 10th.
Yeah. And then you said, if I'm not mistaken, you said that that's only because of the hero pay. So it took COVID-19 for you to even get to 15. But then when you get to 15, because of the way this nation is structured, you still don't have health care.
Still don't have health care.
Because health care is tied to a job and is not tied as a human right. I want folk around the nation to hear that and understand why we are not playing. That why this movement has a certain level of righteous militancy. What these stories that you are hearing should not exist in the wealthiest nation in the world. Thank you, Linda. I want to go to Michigan, and I am going to ask the introducers. I'll give a little grace to those at first, but I do need to ask, because of the time we're working with, the introducers to move straight into introducing, or maybe give 1 or 2 facts and then go straight into introducing the testifier. We want to give the testifier all of their time. So if the co-chairs, the tri-chairs, would you give 1 or 2 facts, but then go right into. And so that's Nakia Nakia from Michigan. No. Am I right? No, LaShawn. I'm sorry. LaShawn from Michigan, if you will introduce our next testifier. Thank you, LaShawn.
Yes, thank you, sir. Hello, everybody. My name is LaShawn Irby from Lansing, Michigan. I'm calling in from Waco, Texas, taking care of my mama right now. We need a Poor People's Campaign in Michigan because 35 million people in our state were already poor and low wealth before the pandemic, and that includes 400,000 children living at home without enough food. Although water is a basic need, over 6,000 Detroit families have been living without water at home. Our Menominee Nation family is still fighting for clean, protected Menominee River that we share with Wisconsin. And 6 years later, Flint is still in crisis because families don't have safe and affordable water. Let's face it, unchecked health disparities easily become death disparities. And to give you a deeper understanding of what I mean, I'm honored to present to you my dear sister, Nakia Wakes, who will share her story as a water justice advocate and deeply dedicated mama from Flint. Nakia?
Wow. Take it off mute, Nakia. We want to hear everything you say. Testing, can you? Okay, Nakia?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. All right. Speak your truth, sister.
Hi, my name is Nakia Wakes. I live in Flint, Michigan. I am age 44 with 2 children. My life before the COVID-19 has been very stressful. It has been over 6 years, and we are still fighting for clean water here in Flint, Michigan. The lead exposure impacted my family tremendously. I lost 2 sets of twins due to drinking the contaminated water, and my daughter also miscarried. Our immune systems have been compromised already. Now we have to worry about the COVID-19. Not only am I fighting for clean water, but I'm also fighting for my son's education. My son is struggling in school. Due to the lead exposure, he's had a lot of problems in school. He's a special education student, and these schools are getting the special education money, but not providing the special education care these children need. I have been homeschooling my son for 3 years now, and ever since the Flint water crisis, because they are doing more online for special education students than they are in the Flint school systems. I am currently the executive assistant of MAID Institute, and we help returning citizens and at-risk youth getting back into their communities. I'm working from home due to the COVID-19. There has been a lot of deaths that I know of, people that I know that have died from the virus, and all I can do is pray and keep moving on for my family. I have no personal transportation, so I rely on friends to take me to the stores for grocery and for massive amount of bottled water that are needed for me, because here in Flint, we need to use bottled water for everything, washing off our vegetables, everything. We cannot drink our tap water. But now that I'm going out to the stores, the shelves are often empty of the supplies that we desperately need here in Flint. I became involved with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, because I thought like if everyone is fighting for some type of same systemic racism, and if we all come together, then maybe something would get done. Thank you.
Thank you for telling your truth and sharing with us that very personal piece about those 2 twins. I want to ask you really just straight up, what do you think should happen to the people from a legal standpoint who knew that they were poisoning the people of Flint? I mean, right from your heart, from your gut, when you think about the children and everybody else. Your words, not mine. What do you think?
I think everybody involved should be incarcerated. From the governor and everybody who knew about it. Everyone should be held accountable for their actions.
I asked you that because a lady yesterday who we were talking with, who's a nurse's assistant and being forced to go in and treat people without PPEs, and talked about all the people that had died who were nurses assistants. She said it clearly. What is happening in this country, the way it's treating poor people before COVID and afterwards, is nothing but a form of mass murder, and we cannot accept it any longer.
I agree.
Wisconsin, Brother Moses, Arendez McGavin, would you introduce a testifier from Wisconsin to speak so that Natalie can speak her truth?
Hi, my name is Moses, and I'm with the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. We need a campaign here because just this past month, Wisconsin witnessed one of the most blatant examples of voter suppression, where despite our state pleading for a delay due to concern for our safety and well-being, the election went on with shortages of poll workers causing the closure of polling sites around the state, including places like Milwaukee, where the usual number of around 180 polling sites shrunk to only 5. But before this election, our state and the nearly 2 million residents who are poor and low income have suffered. With 57 Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies, Wisconsin leads the nation in family farm bankruptcies. As of 2018, nearly 313,000 people in Wisconsin remain uninsured. Today, I am honored to introduce one of our lead organizers, Natalia Fajardo.
Natalia, just before you come on, how many bankruptcies and farms did you just say?
57 Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies in 2019. 8 more than the previous year.
God. Yeah. I'll testify. Natalia?
We are ready. We are ready for liberation. I'm Natalia Fajardo, and 4 weeks ago, I was okay. Like, I'm young, have no kids, and I'm healthy. So is my partner, Gabriel. We have crappy health insurance. Wisconsin's ex-governor refused to expand state health coverage under Obamacare. But we can still see a doctor in our native Colombia when we visit our family. We don't own a home, as the city of Milwaukee stood twice on the way of my family getting our own place, so we rent. We don't have a lot, but we have enough. Or so we thought. Until this pandemic hit, all of a sudden, the chocolate factory I work for closed, so I'm out of work. My husband continues to work, and this is our only source of income. But is that a good thing? What if he gets infected? What if I get infected? Then our crappy US insurance is all we can count for treatment. Gabriel does not have paid sick leave, so our options are for him to go to work and risk exposure, or have no money to pay the bills that felt payable just 4 weeks ago. Now more than ever, I feel the fragility of just being okay. My partner and I are part of the millions that are just one emergency away from losing it all. Meanwhile, our government uses this crisis to fatten the pockets of those who can't fit any more bills in their already overstuffed pockets, bailing out the ones with already a big safety net. And us, we get scraps. But I refuse to stay quiet. I'm a volunteer organizer with the Poor People's Campaign in Wisconsin because I know there is enough food, enough clean and safe water, and definitely enough money for every human being, not just in this country, but in our planet, to live with dignity. So join me in fighting to create the society we all deserve to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalia, you said 2 things I want to ask you. Did you just say, because somebody might say she's not telling the truth. I want you to repeat it again. That you can't get health care in America, but when you go back to your native home, you can get health care in Colombia.
That's right. We have no good coverage in this country.
See, this is the story. This is why we have to have June 20th. This is why we got to put this on blast, y'all. It can no longer, we got to make it to the media, make it to till people can't ignore it. And then the last thing, I have to ask you, I heard what you were saying, not having the right kind of sick leave, not having, a job right now because the plant closed, and yet you came on saying, we are ready. Tell for what you mean by that, because I think I know what you mean. But what should this nation really be worried about when folk like you, in spite of what's going on, say we are ready? What does that mean? What are you saying?
I'm saying we have to come out stronger out of this pandemic. We have to join forces. We have to reach across the aisle. We have to stop pitting ourselves against each other and start looking up where the real problem of this crisis stems from. And so we are getting ready here in Wisconsin for not just June 20th, 2020, but for a real systemic change. And I hope everyone who's watching can join us. Yes. Everybody out there, just say what she just said. We are ready. We are ready. And we're not going to, and as Claude McKay says, if we got to go through this, we're not going to just lay down like dogs. No, we're going to stand up and we're going to speak our truth and we're going to demand change. I want to hold the Theo Musicology video right now. The feel of this moment is so rhythmic, how you all have testified. And I want to go right into the health piece. Dr. Sharrelle Barber is on our health team about COVID, and they have been laying this thing out about what happened before and what's happening now, and why if we deal with what's happening before, we wouldn't be dealing with what we're dealing with now, but why we have to have no holds barred. We must make this nation deal with our 5 interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. I want her to talk about why you can't really deal with the pandemic unless you deal with the fissures, if you will, the wounds. Dr. Barber?
Yes, thank you so much, Bishop Barber, and good evening, Movement family. It's so good to stand with you all tonight. So we are 7 weeks into this pandemic, and by all standards of best public health practice and principles of equity and justice, the U.S. response to COVID-19 has been appalling, leading to the country's current status as the global epicenter of the pandemic. On April 28th, we surpassed 1 million cases and over 50,000 deaths. And these numbers continue to rise. Across the country, healthcare systems are being overwhelmed, frontline healthcare workers are dying, and we continue to lack access to widespread testing and treatment, sufficient protections for low-wage essential workers, and adequate economic relief for the most marginalized segments of our population. And we know that while COVID-19 is indiscriminate in its transmission, poor communities and communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by the disease. The data is heartbreaking, but reveal what we've always known. Racism is deadly. Poverty is deadly. Ecological devastation is deadly. And until this country deals with the deeply embedded inequities resulting from decades of policy violence, this pandemic will continue to exploit the deep fissures of our society. People living in the most impoverished counties in this country are nearly 2 times as likely to die from COVID-19 than those living in the wealthiest counties, regardless of race. Low-wage workers deemed essential during this pandemic are the lifeline holding this economy together, but are the most exposed and least protected. Many more workers are losing their jobs, and an estimated 13.5 million people will lose health insurance by June because of this job loss. We know, and we saw emerging data that shows that Blacks across the country are dying at disproportionate rates, making up 13% of the population, but 27% of confirmed deaths. And in the nation's capital, 44% of the population and 79% of confirmed deaths. And this virus is wreaking havoc, as you've heard from some of our testifiers, in homeless shelters, prisons, detention centers, and among the elderly and long-term care facilities. In my hometown of Goldsboro, North Carolina, over 60% of the inmates at the Noose Correctional Facility tested positive for COVID-19 and are now anxiously awaiting the possibility of death. But it does not have to be this way. Science and proven public health strategies tell us what to do. Widespread access to free testing, free treatment, and safe and humane isolation facilities must be made universal for everybody. And these public health strategies are only effective if the federal government guarantees adequate income protections, economic relief, and ensures safe, humane working conditions for all workers. Safety also demands rapid reduction in the numbers of people held in jails, prisons, and in detention centers so that incarceration does not become a death sentence. Protections for immigrant populations, and documented and undocumented, are vital. None of us is safe, and I'll repeat that. None of us is safe unless all of us are safe. By failing to act using coordinated, data-driven approaches that center equity and justice, this government is literally playing Russian roulette with the lives of its citizens. Now, over the last month, this committee has been so honored to stand alongside this campaign to demand an equitable, just, and moral response to this pandemic. But this fight is far from over, and in the coming weeks, we will continue to stand with all of you to bear witness to the avoidable deaths and to demand a radical transformation of this nation. Justice demands it, and our lives depend on it. As my Brazilian colleagues and comrades would say, "Eu sou porque nós somos." I am because we are. Forward together, not one step back.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barber. And I want you to ask you one more question in the midst of all this. You're an epidemiologist, you studied. Are you saying to us, and are the experts saying to us, that most of these deaths and infections, in particular of the deaths, are a matter of bad choices, not things that inevitably had to happen?
Exactly. We know that there were things that should have been set in place from the onset of this pandemic. This government was reckless and irresponsible in how it responded. It did not do the proper, employ the proper public health strategies to contain the virus and to mitigate the virus. And now the virus is spreading in our communities, and the poor and disinvested communities are paying the price for the actions of this government.
I wanted you to say that because I wanted people to hear out there, especially go to www.poorpeoplescampaign.org and sign up, or June 20, I think the Clinton will give it to us later, where you can go to sign up. But you know, they say that if there's an automatic response. If somebody grabs you around your neck and chokes you, you might be okay for a minute, but when you start dying, your body automatically starts fighting. You can't even help it. You just start fighting back because you fight for life. Well, it's time to fight for life. It is time. It's past time. There were already 700 people dying a day because of choices prior to this. And now in the midst of this, it's past. It's time. And that is why even before this virus, we had demands, Liz. And you're getting ready to hear now our demands video across the nation. Much of it is narrated by Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, but we want you to hear it afresh so you know what this campaign is not just asking, it's not just wishing, it's not just praying for, but it's high time to demand it because these are matters. These inequities are deadly. They are deadly. And we have to fight and believe in life. Show our demands video.
Everybody has a right to live.
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has come up with a series of demands.
I know that you are here for the same reasons we all are here, to put our elected official on notice. We demand an immediate restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We demand an end to racist gerrymandering. We demand a reversal of state laws that prevent municipalities from raising minimum wage. We demand a just immigration system. We demand a timely citizenship process that guarantees guarantees everyone the right to vote.
We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to privatization of military budget and any increase in military spending. We demand a ban on assault rifles and a ban on the easy access of firearms. We demand an end to federal programs that send military equipment into local and state communities. We demand that the call to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border be ceased.
We demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, and offshore drilling. We demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals.
We demand an immediate implementation of federal and state living wage laws. We demand the right for all workers to form and join unions. We demand equal pay for equal work. We demand a guaranteed annual income. We demand fully funded anti-poverty programs that protects the welfare of us all. We demand decent housing. We demand free tuition. We demand equity in education. We demand an end to the resegregation of schools. We demand equitable funding for historically black colleges and universities. We demand relief from crushing household, student, and consumer debt. We demand the repeal of the 2017 federal tax law. And we demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share. We believe that we can win. We believe that everybody has a right to live.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands. When we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have absolutely no option but to demand. And that is why we're having this live stream tonight. And all of you that have joined us, we need you to go to www.poorpeoplescampaign.org, sign up for June 20th, and get everybody you can. June 20th is a generationally transformative digital gathering. It is not an end, but it is a major, major, major continuation of building power in this country. And one of the key voices who has helped us in so many ways, spent 20 years among the homeless, doing homeless organizing, is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. She's a sister beloved. She walks with us. She breathes this stuff. She lives it. And tonight, she's going to have a word at this time. Let us all around the country just welcome Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for tuning in and being with us as we build this movement together. And as we've heard this evening, this coronavirus crisis is worsening broader economic and social emergencies that we have been confronted with for many years. Emergencies caused by the lack of health care and affordable housing, living wages, labor rights, voting rights, environmental protections, caused by war and police violence, the criminal justice system, policy violence of all kinds. For years, this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has been ringing the alarm on these emergencies, offering solutions, taking direct action together to solve them. But as Donald Trump and a bipartisan Congress continue to fumble the response to COVID-19 and sow deep inequities into the response to this pandemic, the Poor People's Campaign is calling for non-cooperation with injustice and inequality. As states are beginning to reopen for business, endangering the lives of the people, kicking people off of unemployment, forcing even more low-wage workers back to work. In the name of helping the poor, we demand that Congress go back to work to fix the coronavirus stimulus bills, make permanent changes that really help the poor, the sick, the uninsured, the homeless, and low-wage workers. Now let's be clear. The United States government has taken bold action, but it's been aimed at protecting the wealthy. Trillions of dollars have been funneled to bail out corporate America. 2 congressmen have released an analysis that people earning over $1 million could receive an average tax windfall of $1.6 million from the stimulus. U.S. billionaire wealth has increased by $406 billion in the same time period that 30 million people have applied for unemployment. The scarcity myth invoked to defend budget decisions for the past 40 years was a pretext to justify policymakers' true priorities. When the rich need rescuing, the money appears. But the 4 bills that Congress has passed have no provisions for a permanent living wage, for paid sick leave for all, or health insurance for the uninsured. These bills leave out the majority of homeless, undocumented immigrants, the disabled, and many poor, but not counted in our unemployment numbers. They place only a 4-month moratorium on eviction filings. They do not include rent freezes nor large-scale debt forgiveness. Now, the Bible is clear that making policy that does not protect the rights of the poor and puts the cause of the wealthy first is evil. Zechariah 7:10 reminds us, "Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against one another in your heart." Jeremiah 5:28 cries out, "They have grown fat and sleek. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper, and they do not defend the rights of the needy." Poor and low-income people do not need platitudes and prayers that recognize how essential we are while ignoring our basic needs. We need accessible health care, living wages, food security, worker protections, and access to clean water and affordable housing. And so we are demanding those and building the power to win our demands. Indeed, this evening, we are gathered to demonstrate the power of poor and impacted people banding together and demanding that this country change for the better. To call for a radical redistribution of political and economic power, a revolution of moral values. We are gathered to rise together at the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, June 20th, 2020. And just like those who have testified here tonight, since the first days of this pandemic, we've witnessed that poor and dispossessed people and those now being awakened to a new kind of precarity will not wait to be saved, but will, as always, take life-saving action born out of necessity to demand justice now. Over the past weeks, people across the country have led wildcat strikes and won moratoriums on homeless encampment suites, evictions, utility shutoffs, and more. In Detroit, the People's Water Board, the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, the Michigan Poor People's Campaign forced the city government to enact a moratorium on water shutoffs and turn water service back on for $25. In California, Moms for Housing and the California Homeless Union, the California Poor People's Campaign have taken over vacant houses and organized to protect tent encampments that are poised to grow as unemployment continues to balloon. In Pennsylvania, Put People First Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, and others have organized from a place of necessity long before this crisis, fighting the closure of rural hospitals across the state, erasing medical debt of thousands of people, and now in Philadelphia, people are coming together to demand the reopening of Hahnemann Hospital, which was recently bought by a real estate speculator and now sits empty in this public health crisis. These are the kind of reopen campaigns that should animate the nation. Reopen city hospitals, reopen rural hospitals, reopen housing, reopen water lines and utilities. These struggles are a rallying cry for our government and our larger society to take action together, to organize, organize, organize. As he was building the 1968 Poor People's Campaign with the Welfare Rights Movement and the Native Americans and the Jewish Federation and many others, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous to say no." This is what we are doing. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, is building power, developing our ability, displaying our togetherness, organizing our assertiveness, and demonstrating our aggressiveness. And Dr. King continues, he says, our nettlesome task is to discover how to organize our strength into compelling power so that the government cannot elude our demands. It would be the height of naivete to wait passively until the administration had somehow been infused with such blessings of goodwill that implored us for our programs. No, we are not waiting passively. We are coming together in compelling power with our demands. We are not waiting for goodwill or charity, but bringing together a massive moral fusion movement of people of all races, religions, genders, geographies, issue areas, so the administration cannot elude our demands. We need a relief bill that centers the needs of the homeless, the uninsured, the underemployed, the low-wage workers now deemed essential, even though our wages do not show this. We must invest in education and living wage jobs, anti-poverty programs, public infrastructure, and a single-payer healthcare program that does away with our privatized for-profit healthcare system and instead guarantees everybody in, nobody out. We have put forward these demands in our petition, Poverty Amidst Pandemic, a Moral Response to COVID-19, and we encourage everybody that has not yet done so to go to moveon.org/poverty and sign that petition. We have put together a Poor People's Moral Budget that shows that we can have universal health care, we can have the right to a job at a living wage, we can have voting rights, we can have quality education and housing. And yes, we are building the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington on June 20th, 2020. We are crying power. We are calling out everybody's got a right to live. We believe that we can win forward together, not one step back.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liz. You always have a way of putting things and helping us understand in your own way how serious these matters are. I'm going to close with 4 things. And we're going to close with the prayer, and then we're going to put up somebody's hurting my brother, my sister, and it's gone on far too long as we end this call tonight. But before then, I want everybody who's on this live stream, whatever platform, to take a moment and call the names of people who you know have died needlessly. Needlessly. I know it may be tough and hard, it may be tearful, but as one of my friends teaches me, the African proverbs say, as long as we call their names, they are always with us. I have a classmate who may be watching tonight, and she told me she's had 7 people in her family. 7. A church family that's had 5 to die, 4 who are struggling through the virus, and 1 that needs testing and can't get it and has the symptoms. I want us to call their names. But I also want to ask a question. What do we do with that? Where do we put that? What do we do with that kind of death? What that nurse's aide called mass murder. What do we do with it? Well, during the days of slavery, when a slave was lynched, the other slaves like Harriet Tubman made a commitment to work hard against the system that had caused their death. It's the same ways in the early days of the labor movement. When a labor person was killed on the line, they organized more, and they did it in their name. I was thinking today about this poem that comes from the Harlem Renaissance, and I wanted to quote it tonight in memory of those who have died, but also to call us to live for them and to live in such a way that we will see a day when there will be no more of them. That is, them who die because of the wicked policies of humankind. We know we all have to die. But when policies and ineptitude and public idolatry and lies contribute to death, it is premeditated murder by government policies. Claude McKay, back in the Harlem Renaissance, saw his brothers and sisters being lynched. He saw his brothers and sisters being beat down from mobs, many of them who had fought in World War I for this country. When they came back home, they had given first-class blood, and they were being treated like second-class citizens. And looking at their deaths, he decided to make a declaration that I think ought to be ours. Because we, in this campaign, we got people at risk right now. There are people at risk right now. And he said, if we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while around us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us die nobly, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. And then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave. And for their 1,000 death blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, and let me update this poem, like women, like our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, we will face the murderous, cowardly pact, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. All of us need to ask this question. What if we only had 48 hours left? That could happen in COVID. How would you use your last breath if you knew you had 48 hours left? We need to make the commitment that if I knew it, I would use my last breath to fight for a world of justice and a world of love and a world of grace. It's time to use what breath we have and what days we have left on this earth to breathe fresh life into this world, into this democracy, because everybody has a right to live. Secondly, tonight as we close, we have announced a campaign, Stay in Place, Stay Alive, and Organize. Stay in place, stay alive, and organize. Now, we know some people are essential workers and they can't. But the reason we stay safe, stay in place, because everybody doesn't have a home in the midst of all of the homeless. But we're calling on poor and low income people and others, even if you're not poor and low income, to join a nonviolent resistance. Don't believe these governors who are lying. They have lied to us about health care. They've lied to us about racist voter suppression. They've lied to us about tax cuts. There's no way in the world we should believe them when they say it's time to reopen up. Many of them only want to open up so they won't have to pay unemployment. This thing is lethal. Many of them just want to open up because they want us to go back to normal. I think some of them want us to open up because too many people are sitting home and they're figuring this thing out. They're realizing how broken it is. People who never thought they would be poor are poor again, and they're starting to think and they're starting to have compassion. They want us rushing past each other again. They want us running past each other again. We can't. Dr. Barber reminded us today about Singapore. They went back and what happened? Do not. So we're saying, don't go in the street. We don't need folk in the street with guns. We need grace toward one another. We don't need flags waving in the air. We need testing and health care. We don't need to be in the streets cussing. We need to be caring for one another. So stay in place. Stay alive so we can keep fighting for a better world. Don't give them your life. Don't listen to somebody who doesn't care about your life, because there are too many people who are too comfortable with other people's death in the first place. That's why we are where we are right now. Don't give it away. You can stay in place, stay alive, and while you're there, organize. Since you got all that time at home, organize for June 20, 2020. Use that time organizing and sending people. While you're at home, get ready, because there's a day coming where we're going to ask all of us in this campaign and beyond to make a minimum of 100,000 calls to Pelosi and McConnell and to Schumer, Pelosi and McConnell, demanding that we have a true rescue bill. When that day comes, stay home, stay alive, organize, help us get these calls. And then third, stay home, stay alive, and organize, and call people and make sure that people are registered to vote, because your vote is a matter of life and death. We cannot have another election where 80,000 people not voting gives us what we have in the White House. Stay in place, stay alive, and organize. That's our call, and you'll be seeing that we're sending out the emails and the press releases. And then finally, we have learned from the public health specialists that pandemics spread through the wounds, the already open wounds of the society. And Liz, I was reading today in Jeremiah, the 8th chapter in the Message Bible, and it jumped out at me. It says this. It says, take warning. It says, little people and big people alike, prophets and priests and everyone in between, twist words and they doctor the truth. My dear daughter, my people broken, shattered, and yet they put on Band-Aids on their wounds. They put Band-Aids on their wounds. The King James says they care lightly for their wounds. And they say, it's not so bad, it's not so bad, you'll be fine. But things, says the prophet, are not fine. And the prophet says, do you think they're embarrassed by these lies, embarrassed by putting Band-Aids on your wounds? No, not really, because they have no shame. They don't even know how to blush. There's no hope for them. they've hit bottom and there's no getting up. And as far as I'm concerned, said God, they're finished. In other words, they're all greedy for gain. The politicians and some of the religious alike, they all press deceit. And God says, they say peace, peace when there is no peace. And it's time, says God, to shut it down. That's what Jeremiah says. God said, there comes a time and you got to shut it down. And so we know there were many wounds open that were not being cared for. We were being told everything was all right. As long as Wall Street is all right, it's all right. But there were wounds, 140 million people in poverty and low income. Wounds, 80 million people without insurance or underinsured. Wounds, 4 million people that could buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water every day. Wounds, wounds, wounds. Wounds were open. And when this pandemic hit, it found its way to those wounds and it exploited the wounds, and it will continue to exploit the wound, and it will continue to ravage the land. Even when they say flatline, flatline doesn't mean it's not killing people. Flatline means it's not overrunning the hospital, but flatline could still mean a whole lot of poor and low income folk are dying. And some folk want it back to that. They want it back to where it was in February, where 250,000 people were dying a day from poverty and low income, and nobody's saying. Now, that's what they call normal. That's what we called wounds. You can't deal with this pandemic. Nobody's safe if we don't deal with the wounds. I was told by somebody the other day, well, let's just get some things done, and we'll work on the inequities down the road. 2 years from now, we'll do another study. No, you have to deal with the wounds, the inequities right now. And so the prophet tells us several things, and I close. We must demand that the wounds be closed, because there's no way to heal the nation unless these wounds of racial and inequalities and economic inequalities and ecological inequalities. No way to heal the wounds while we're still putting more in the war economy and into the business of killing rather than the business of healing. There's no way. So we must demand that the wounds be closed. And then we must warn the nation what will happen if the wounds aren't closed. Singapore, Japan, other places, down through the year, we have an obligation to warn this nation like Jeremiah warned the nation of old. This is, if you don't listen to these testifiers we've heard tonight from Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania and all over this country, this nation will never be on solid ground. It will always have pus running out of itself until we close these wounds. And then there's one more thing we have to be. We have to be wounded healers. And I don't know why it's like that, y'all. I don't know why it's so in the universe that the slaves have to save the nation from the system of slavery. But it's been like that. I don't quite understand why the women who couldn't vote had to save the nation from voter oppression. Why was gay people that had to save the nation from not being true to equal protection under the law? Why is it that it was the people who experienced the Jim Crow, who were wounded by it, who then had to be the healers? It's always been like that. And so now we've been assigned to be wounded healers. Those of us that know what it's like to be wounded, that knows what it's like when your wounds turn septic, that know what it's like when you can't feed your children, to know what it's like to have chronic diseases and don't have health care. We must rise up together, for we have been called and given an assignment to be wounded healers. We must refuse to accept any more Band-Aids, any more of them. Because to accept Band-Aids is to participate in our own destruction. And it is to participate in the destruction of the nation. I went back and read something about hospitals, and they say that if a hospital is found giving out bad care, if a hospital is found for not following the rules that hospitals are supposed to run by, you can shut it down, or you can put it under new management. But what you don't do when a hospital keeps allowing things to go on that are killing people rather than making them well, is continue to operate. We cannot allow America to continue to operate like this. We have power because we have the wounds. I come from a tradition that says that the great one in my tradition, Jesus, one of the things that gave him power was he had wounds in his hands. We have wounds. And I was reading a little bit more, Sharrelle, and I noticed that they say that bad hospitals always get closed or shut down when those who get bad treatment complain. It's only when the wounded complain that bad hospitals get shut down. Well, y'all, we must be the wounded healers. We must be the wounded ones. 4 bills have been passed, and there have been nothing but Band-Aids. We must raise a complaint. That's nothing to close the wounds in those bills. Nothing to close the wounds of people not having health care. Nothing to close the wounds of people not having living wages. Nothing to close the wounds of people who are afraid that their water, their lights could be turned off tomorrow. Nothing in those bills to close the wounds and have the Army Corps of Engineers go and put hospitals in all of these places where hospitals have been closed. Nothing to close the wounds that say, what good is it if you can get free testing, but then you can't get health care if you're found sick? We must say that's a Band-Aid. And a Band-Aid is not enough. For the wound, they tell me, you have to dig all the way down to the bottom of the wound, clean it all the way out, pack it, and then slowly pull the packing out so that it heals from the outside. And so if we don't get real treatment for the wound, shut it down. That must be our call. Yes, we will do it with love. Yes, we will do it with nonviolence. Yes, we will do it with grace. Yes, we would do it with truth. But when the government and the president tells us to go back with all these wounds, it's time for us to shut it down and refuse to go back. We can't let greed dictate our actions. If we, all poor and low-income workers will stand up and say we're the wounded, and we refuse to accept Band-Aids anymore. We need to shut it down. No more refusing to treat our wounds. No more genocide. No more mass murder. Shut it down. No more lack of health care. No more refusal of living wages. And I close with this, Liz. Jeremiah said that's what God would do. The text says, God said, because you refuse to treat the wounds of my people, I'm going to shut it down. And if it was good enough for God, I'll follow God's orders over governors any day. I'll follow God's orders over a president any day. I'll follow God's order over a congressperson any day. Because if we shut it down, then we can build it back and have a place where wounds are no longer treated lightly and no longer just put Band-Aids over wounds, but there can be real healing in the land. I don't know why we're chosen, y'all. We all got our own struggles. I'm half crippled, can't walk half the time. But I do know that there is a power that wounded healers have when we accept our assignment to heal the nation. God bless you. Let's organize. Stay in place. Stay alive and organize. Somebody's hurting our brothers and sisters. It's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. God bless you all. Love you. Love you all over the country. Play that video and we're out of here. We'll see you digitally on June 20th.
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to dream, to dream. Everybody's got a right to love, to love. Everybody's got a right to learn, to learn. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to
Continue the journey of this day. Let us unite our hearts together in prayer. Merciful God, may we who know justice and compassion repent for those who have let the viruses of greed and lies make a difficult situation worse. May those who have gone along with the lies just to please narcissism break free and tell the truth. May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are truly at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from our homes remember those who must choose between preserving their health or making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those who have no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our money, our margin money, in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. And may we who settled in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors. In your mercy, Lord, hear our prayer. Amen. Peace.
Amen, everybody. God bless you all.
A powerful new movement is rising across America. From the Mississippi Delta to the Apache stronghold, from the homeless encampments of Washington to the coal fields of West Virginia. We are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, and we are building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, between the primaries and the general election, we will rise together for the mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
Our nation is at a historic crossroads. There are those who say big change isn't necessary or possible, that we are powerless to make our lives better.
But history teaches us that it is exactly in times like these that people from all walks of life must build a broad and deep movement from the bottom up.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic for a massive, historic online gathering that will embolden us, strengthen us, and prepare us to fight for the kind of society we know we so badly need and deserve.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org.